I think you might be surprised by a few things he says, because I don't know that everyone's necessarily aware of, how epidemic, pornography is in our culture today, in our society. So, but he'll be sharing that with you this evening. Just a little bit of an introduction. Dr. Peter Kleponis, he lives in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and that's I think a suburb of Philadelphia. So he's from that area of the country, with his wife Maria and 2 sons, Jack and Matthew. Dr. Kleponis is a licensed clinical therapist and the assistant director of the Comprehensive Counseling Service in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. Is that right? Did I say that right? He holds an MA in clinical counseling psychology from LaSalle University of Philadelphia and a PhD in general psychology from Capella University in Minneapolis. For over 19 years, he's been providing professional services, working with individuals, couples, families, and organizations. He specializes in marriage and family therapy, pastoral counseling, resolving anger, men's issues, and pornography addiction recovery. He's certified in the diagnosis and treatment of sexual addictions. And he travels all around the country educating people on how we can win the battle against pornography. He's presented his conferences to many different dioceses and college and seminaries, religious communities, parents groups, and other Catholic organizations. He's been a guest on EWTN television programming such as Women of Grace, Franciscan University Presents, and Crossing to Goal. He's a regular guest on Relevant Radio's program On Call. And so we're just very happy that you could take time out of your busy schedule to be with us for this day. He came in yesterday morning, presented all day and all night, and then he leaves early in the morning tomorrow. So it's taxing on your schedule, but we're just delighted that you would be with us for this day. So I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Peter Kleponis.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. It's been a whirlwind tour, but a very enjoyable one. I very much appreciate the hospitality that I've received out here. It's been wonderful. But thank you for that introduction. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My training is in marriage and family therapy, and I've been in practice for over 19 years now. When I began practicing, I made 2 decisions. Number 1, I wanted to incorporate our Catholic faith into the healing process because I knew that would make it more effective. And number 2, I wanted to work with men and the issues they dealt with. So over the years, I worked with a lot of men, I worked with a lot of women, couples, teens, and so forth, dealing with various issues. But about 8 years ago, I noticed a shift in my clientele. More men were coming to me who were struggling with pornography. In fact, for the women, the married men, it was usually their wives that were calling up seeking help. So I realized there was a trend here, and I decided to study it and see what was going on. And in doing my research, what I discovered is that there's a huge epidemic out there of internet pornography addiction. But nobody wanted to talk about it. No one even wanted to touch it. But it was a huge problem, and it was affecting people's lives, their individual lives, their marriages, their families, their careers, all of this. Right? So I went back to school, retooled, got certified in the treatment of sexual addiction, and this became a specialization. Another thing I did was I created the first recovery program for Catholics dealing with pornography addiction. That's one of the primary reasons why the men were coming to me. They were looking for a Catholic recovery program, and there wasn't any out there. So after a lot of prayer and discernment, I realized that maybe God was calling me to create one, and that's what I did. And it's called the Integrity Starts Here program. So I'm here tonight to educate you, and I'm going to give my presentation here. I've actually got 2 talks I'm going to be giving. The first talk I'm going to be giving is about the pornography epidemic in America. What is really going on out there, and how is this affecting us? The second talk is going to be what we can do about it. I'm going to talk about how we can protect our families from this, and then what we can do to help those who may be struggling with this addiction. Because we now know it is an addiction. We have the neuroscience evidence to show us that this is an addictive substance. And that's what I'm going to get into talking with you tonight about. So let's dive in now. Before I start, I want to take a little poll here. I want you to raise your hand if you have never seen pornography. Okay, so most of us are on the same page. But really, you know, in order to talk about pornography, we first have to define it. What is it? It can mean different things to different people. So, in fact, one former Supreme Court justice once said, when it comes to pornography, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. So the first thing we have to do is come up with a working definition for pornography. And I actually have two definitions that I use. The first one is one I developed for my clinical practice. The second one actually comes from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So my definition of pornography is that it's any image that leads a person to use another person for their own sexual pleasure. It is devoid of love, relationship, love, and intimacy, and it can be highly addictive. Now, the key word in this definition is use. Using another person for your own sexual pleasure. And that's what pornography is. That's what lust is, using it. For example, you know, when a man is viewing pornography on the internet, he's looking at that woman on his computer screen. He's not thinking that that's somebody's daughter or somebody's wife or mother. He's not thinking that that's a person with thoughts and feelings. He's not thinking about the terrible circumstances that led her into the pornography industry. And believe me, they are terrible. I don't know of any healthy young woman who would ever say she wants to go up to be a porn star. All he knows is that she is there for his sexual pleasure and he is going to use her. And of course, God did not create his children to be used. And as in using, there is no relationship, there is no love, there is no intimacy in that. But this is what it's all about. Now, another thing, when we look at this definition, does that image have to be of someone who is unclothed? No. No. It could be anybody. The key is using them. Another thing, when we look at the word image, we normally think of pictures, videos, photographs. Well, you know, images can be created with words, too. And there can be other forms of pornography. How many of you are familiar with the books, The 50 Shades of Grey? Right, yeah. Basically, it's pornography in words. Pornography disguised as a relationship, but it's presented in words. So it's not just images. There are many ways. But it's about using people, and that's what we have to look at it as. And it can be highly addictive, and I'll talk a little more about that. Now, the next definition is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I have to read this because it's kind of long. But the Catechism states, pornography consists in removing real or simulated sexual acts from the intimacy of the partners in order to display them deliberately to third parties. It offends against chastity because it perverts the conjugal act, the intimate giving of spouses to each other. Right? There's no intimacy here. There's no love. It does grave injury to the dignity of its participants, since each one becomes an object of base pleasure and illicit profit for others. It immerses all who are involved in the illusion of a fantasy world. It is a grave offense. Civil authorities should prevent the production and distribution of pornographic materials. Now, I like this definition because it covers a lot of bases. However, this definition was developed well over 20 years ago. If they were to revise it today, it would probably include something about the addictiveness of pornography, because we know it is now. So let's talk a little bit about some statistics in pornography. Every second, over $3,000 is being spent on pornography. Every second, over 28,000 internet users are viewing pornography. Every second, 372 internet users are typing sexual terms into search engines. And every 39 minutes, a new pornographic video is being produced in the United States. And let me tell you, the largest and fastest growing category of internet pornography is amateur pornography. People are making their own pornography and they're posting it on the internet through various pornographic websites, through social media, Facebook, and so forth. This is what's going on out there now. Let's talk about the money, because the money is huge in this. All right. The pornography industry earns over $100 billion every year. 13 billion of that comes from the United States alone. And it earns more than the top technology companies combined. Whoever thought anybody could earn more than Apple or Microsoft or Amazon? Pornography earns more than all of them combined. Child pornography in the United States generates $3 billion a year. Now you may be wondering, how are they making all this money? Because there's a ton of free porn on the internet. You could go online and you could watch free pornography for hours. Well, the pornographers know that what they're promoting is a drug, and their goal is to get as many people as addicted as possible. So like any good drug pusher, they're going to give out samples. And that's what it is. You go on all these websites and you have all these free samples, anywhere from 3 to 20 minutes of video, right? All this. And you can watch it forever. But what happens is, when a person becomes addicted to this stuff, after a while, those samples aren't enough. They want more and more than just that. And at that point, the pornographers know they have you hooked, and that's when they want your credit card number. And this is where a person then subscribes to the websites, and they get in there and they get to see more pornography. Now, subscribing to these websites may not be a lot of money for the individual consumer, maybe $5 a month. But think of it this way. If a pornographer is able to get just 50,000 people to subscribe to their website, which is not hard, at $5 a piece, that's $250,000 a month. That's $3 million a year. That's what's going on. Now, these aren't people that are just working out of their garages. These are major media companies who are hosting hundreds of these websites. And it's all about getting your money. That's what it is. It's a business, and they want your money, and they're doing it by getting people addicted to it. But this is where all that money is coming from. Let's talk about some more stats. There are 4.2 million pornographic websites, 420 million pornographic web pages, 68 million daily pornographic search engine requests. 25% of all Google requests are for sexual content. There are 4.5 billion average daily pornographic emails and 100,000 child porn websites worldwide. This is what's going on. And I have to tell you, as sobering as these statistics are, they are probably gross underestimates of what's really going on out there. Because the fact is, there's no way we could ever accurately measure this. We're talking the World Wide Web. This is what's going on. And this is how it's affecting people. Let's talk about adult pornography statistics. Men who admit to excessive pornography at work, 20%. And those are the ones who just admit to it. What about the ones who don't? And this is having a tremendous impact on our economy. Every year, corporations across the country lose billions of dollars in lost productivity. Why? People aren't doing their jobs. Instead, they're all on looking at pornography. And a lot of people are losing their jobs because of this. Companies now realize what's going on. They're monitoring their computer systems, and they have very tough policies. Where I live outside of Philadelphia, our largest employer is the Vanguard Group of Mutual Funds. They have their headquarters out there. They employ over 30,000 people. Their policy is, the first time you're caught, you get a warning. The second time, you're out. Right? And they have fired hundreds of people. So it's affecting lives, you know. And if you're working, if you're the sole breadwinner in your family and you lose your job because of that, you're really in trouble. But this is what's going on out there in the corporate world. U.S. adults who regularly visit internet pornography websites, 40 million. Promise Keepers. Anybody familiar with the Promise Keepers? It's a group of evangelical Protestant men who are striving to live good Christian lives. Promise Keepers who view pornography in the last week, 53%. That was a study done by Christianity Today. Christians who said pornography is a major problem in the home, 47%. Again, that was done by Christianity Today. Adults admitting to internet sexual addiction, 10%. And again, those are the ones who only admit to it. What about the ones who won't admit to it? What about the ones who are addicted and don't even know it? Right? This is what we're finding among a lot of college students. Because pornography use is so common among them, there are students out there who are addicted and they don't even know it until it's too late. And what's the breakdown of male to female users of pornographic websites? 72% men and 28% female. A third of all visitors to pornographic websites are women. So it's not just a men's issue. This is also a women's issue, and it's growing. I think it's much higher than a third. I think it's maybe more like 40% of women out there are visiting pornographic websites. So let's talk about how pornography enters our lives. It comes in from many different directions. First, we have television, cable, satellite, internet TV. Right? I think 20 years ago, the television censors in Hollywood just gave up and went home. Right? There is nobody out there protecting us. Movies, obviously. Today, what we consider PG-13 probably would have been rated X about 30 years ago. The internet, obviously, the number one place where people are viewing pornography. Social media, this is a big factor. Remember I told you the fastest and largest growing category of pornography today is amateur pornography. A lot of people are creating their own porn and posting it on the internet. People are setting up their own Facebook pages just to present their own pornography. This is where we get sexting. That's a form of pornography. And we'll talk a little more about that. Video games. Parents are often worried about the violence in video games. Well, I have to tell you, they can be just as pornographic. Very pornographic, and parents don't know it. Another thing that parents don't realize is that kids can actually view internet pornography through the video game system. Because the Xbox, the Wii, and the PlayStation are hooked up to the internet, kids can get in there and instead of playing video games on the screen, they're watching pornography. Cell phones. There was a study recently done which found that 55% of all internet pornography today is viewed on cell phones. That's the primary source right now. And of course, cell phones, smartphones, iPhones, they're getting bigger and bigger. Some of them look like mini tablets. But this is where they're getting it from. Print media, magazines, newspapers, catalogs. We all know the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, the Victoria's Secret catalog, all forms of pornography. Although I do have good news, Victoria's Secret has just announced that they're going to stop printing their catalog. They found that it wasn't increasing sales. Why? Well, women weren't looking at it, men were looking at it for pornographic reasons. They weren't buying, they were just getting a cheap thrill out of it. So at least that's one less thing we have to worry about. Popular music can also be very pornographic. The other night on TV there were the Billboard Awards. All right, all of the performances were highly sexually charged, very pornographic. Okay, so and of course clothing can be very pornographic. So why do we have so much pornography in our culture? Why are we being bombarded with it from every direction? It's simple: money. It's all about the money. 100 years ago, Madison Avenue discovered that sex sells. If you attach sex to anything, you can sell it very easily. And this is what they're doing. So it's not just using sex to sell a product, they're trying to sell pure sex. That's what they're doing. And it's all about the money. They don't care who gets hurt, who they exploit. They want the money. Now let's talk about the addictiveness of pornography, because again, like I said, we now know that this is an addictive substance. Now when we talk about addictions, there are actually two categories of addictions. You have chemical addictions and you have behavioral addictions. Now, chemical addictions are addictions to things like drugs and alcohol. That's what we're most familiar with. Behavioral addictions are a little different. You're not taking any type of foreign chemical in the body, but you're using a substance that has the same type of effect on the brain. The most common behavioral addiction would be gambling addiction, but pornography and sexual addiction also falls into that category of a behavioral addiction. So that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about the addictiveness of pornography, we have to look at it also as two sides of a coin. On the one side, we have the physical addiction, where the body becomes physically dependent on pornography just to function and physically craves it. Here's where we're going to be talking about brain chemistry, what it does up here. On the other side of the coin, we have the emotional side of the addiction, where pornography is often used to ease some type of emotional pain. Right? How many of you have ever heard the term self-medicating? That's what we're talking about. Using it to ease the pain, using it as an escape. So let's first talk about the physical addiction. Now, I'm going to first talk about how this affects men, and then I'm going to talk about how it affects women, because it's different. Now, the first thing we have to realize is that men and women are wired differently. Our brains are different. Okay? Men are wired to be visually stimulated. You know, we see a beautiful girl walk by, we look. It's automatic. You know, that's why I put this little guy on the screen with his eyes bugging out. Okay? There's actually a structure in our brain called the thalamus which actually helps us pick out erotic images and to focus on them. So what happens when we encounter an erotic image, there is a series of chemical reactions that occurs in the brain. There are several chemicals that are released in huge amounts that create a high, that create an excitement, that create a sexual tension. So let me talk about them. The first chemical that's released is called dopamine. And this is released into the brain, and when it mixes with testosterone, it can affect the brain like a drug. And it creates a feeling of excitement. Now, dopamine also creates a focus on sex to satisfy the craving. So it's this hyper-focusing on sex for this craving. Another chemical is called norepinephrine. All right. This affects the brain like adrenaline and ramps it up for sexual activity. It's like winding up a spring, getting it ready to move for that sexual release. Now, norepinephrine is also called the snapshot chemical. A lot of men will say that whenever they look at an erotic image, it kind of gets burned into their brains and is there for a long time. That's what norepinephrine does. It locks in those images. This is why men don't have to even use pornography to masturbate. All we have to do is close our eyes and we can have a whole parade of images up there for us. That's what norepinephrine does. It also triggers a spike in testosterone, which is responsible for sexual aggression. And norepinephrine activates the autonomic nervous system. So this is where when men are looking at pornography, their heart starts beating faster, they might start breathing heavier, some men may begin to sweat. The third chemical is called delta-phos-B, and this increases the craving for more. It makes you want to go back for more and more. Another chemical called serotonin is released in small packets in the brain, elevating the sense of excitement. And with all this going on, there's a message that's sent down the spinal cords to the genitals for sexual arousal, for an erection. Now, with all this going on, there's a physical and an emotional tension that develops that can only be relieved with an orgasm. So the man masturbates. I hope you're not offended if I use that term, folks, but it's what it is. Now, with an orgasm, opiate chemicals called endorphins are released into the brain, and they provide a sense of euphoria. And then when it's all over, there's this incredible feeling of relaxation. Now, there's a couple of other chemicals I want to mention called oxytocin and vasopressin. These are bonding chemicals, bonding hormones that are released during sex. And it's used to bond a couple together, a healthy man and wife together. But what it does in pornography, it bonds the man to the pornographic image on the website, rather than a real human being. So let's talk about the whole process. Okay, we start with the image. That leads to fantasy, then excitement, arousal, stimulation, tension, orgasm, euphoria, and relaxation. That is a very powerful drug, and the brain says, wow, this is incredible. This is the best experience we've ever had. So let's go back to this. And because the effects are temporary, you have to keep going back to it over and over again. But the brain says, hey, this is so good, so from now on, anytime we're happy, sad, lonely, angry, bored, burned out, frustrated, ashamed, abandoned, rejected, whatever, we're going to go back to this. Because this is the express train to pleasure. So this is what's going on. Now, people often say, well, doesn't this type of chemical reaction occur when a husband and wife are having sex? I would say, yes, it does, but not as intense. Okay? It's not as intense. But it is better in a healthy marital relationship. Why? Well, I compare, pornography and masturbation and sex to fire. Viewing pornography and masturbating is like lighting a match. It flares up really bright, it's fun and exciting, but it goes out very quickly. Right? Sex between a healthy husband and wife, that's like building a slow-burning fire that gets bigger and bigger, right? It's not always exciting, but it's far more satisfying. And why is that? Because there's a relationship. Right? See, pornography is trying to promote this lie, this illusion, this fantasy that the type of sex they're promoting on the internet is more fulfilling and more satisfied than married sex. And it's not. It's a lie. And that's what it is. If you want to give it another analogy, sex and pornography is like running an engine on rocket fuel. Yeah, it'll go fast, but it'll burn out quickly. In a healthy marriage, it's like running an engine on gasoline the way it should. And that's what we're seeing here. Right? It's too much. Now, as with any type of addiction, after a while, a tolerance develops. A little isn't enough. You need more of the substance to get the same effect. So after a while, that soft porn just doesn't do it for you anymore. It's just not enough. You want more. So that Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue doesn't do it anymore. You need something stronger. So the man may move on to more hardcore forms of pornography, which can include violence, children fetishes, all kinds of stuff. Right? I have men who tell me today that the kinds of pornography that a couple of years ago they would have found repulsive is the type of porn they seek out today. Why? Because that's what arouses them. The tolerance has developed. Right? In addition to looking for a stronger form of pornography, he may spend more time viewing pornography. So instead of 20 minutes once a week, it could be an hour or two a day. The time increases. And eventually, for some people, viewing sexual acts and pornography is not enough. They want to experience it live. So what will happen? They'll go to strip clubs, prostitutes, have anonymous sex partners, and so forth. It doesn't surprise me that we're seeing more and more strip clubs opening up across the United States. And you may wonder, well, why would anybody go to, what kind of a person goes to a strip club? To me, it's simple. Someone who's addicted to pornography and the tolerance has developed to the point where just watching on the internet's not enough. They want to experience it live. But the problem is it doesn't stop there. It's not enough to simply watch the show at the strip club. They want to participate. And here's where they may end up going to prostitutes, having anonymous sexual encounters, and so forth. And this is having devastating effects on people's lives and can result in contracting sexually transmitted diseases. And for marriages, it's particularly devastating. I've had several couples come to me where the wife discovered her husband's addiction because she contracted a sexually transmitted disease. She got it from her husband, who got it from the prostitutes. Now you can imagine how devastating that is to a marriage. This is what is happening out there. In addition to the tolerance, a dependence develops. This is where the person physically craves it. The brain has become so accustomed to operating at such a high level of chemical stimulation that it needs to maintain it just to function. So it's no longer just about getting a thrill. This is about functioning, right? And there are actual withdrawal symptoms a person can experience if they don't get that regular fix. And those symptoms can be depression, headaches, anxiety, stomach aches, insomnia, irritability, and even poor concentration. I remember several months ago I was working with a high school senior who had become addicted to pornography, and he was in the first couple months of his recovery. And he came into my office and he said, "Dr. Pete, I don't understand this. I feel like I'm walking around with a constant hangover." I said, "Yeah, that's the withdrawal symptoms." In fact, he was going through detox. His brain was detoxing from all of that chemical activity. And even if a person doesn't experience withdrawal symptoms, there can still be a dependence on it. Think about the man who goes online, views pornography, masturbates. After a while, he feels terrible, and he says, "I will never do this again." But what happens the next day? He's back at it again. Those chemical levels are starting to drop in the brain. It says, uh-oh, this isn't good. We've got to get them right back up where they need to be. And we know where to do that. Pornography. That's the physical side of the addiction. Let's talk about the emotional side, the other side of the coin. Now, a lot of people get into pornography, often in their early adolescent years, out of pure curiosity. You're getting into puberty, interested in the opposite sex. You want to know about sex. Mom and dad aren't talking about it. The sex ed you get at school isn't that great. So they look to pornography. But what may be happening, and of course they may simply view it as engaging in adult entertainment. Everybody does it, what's the big deal, it's a guy thing. But really deep down inside, he may be using pornography to subconsciously ease the pain of some deep emotional wounds. Is he aware of that? No. All he knows is that he likes viewing porn. That's it. But this is what's going on. And of course, because the effects are temporary, he has to keep going back. So here's what happens. He discovers pornography, and this little voice deep down inside says, hey, this is the perfect escape. This makes us forget about all our problems. So let's keep going back to this. But the more you keep going back to it, the more you become emotionally dependent on it to keep that pain at bay. Right? That's what's happening. So, and this is where the addiction occurs. So what happens is you keep going back to pornography to keep that emotional pain at bay. Here's where the person becomes emotionally addicted. But again, the more you keep going back to keep that pain at bay, the more the chance that physical side also has time to kick in. And here's where they work together, physically and emotionally addicted. So let's talk about some of the emotional wounds that people may struggle with. All right? Family of origin wounds. All right? What are they? Could be growing up in a home where there's any type of abuse going on. Physical, emotional, sexual, verbal abuse. Growing up in a home where one or both parents is addicted, either to drugs or alcohol or whatever. Growing up in a home where there's divorce. Now, a lot of people downplay the effects of divorce on children, but let me tell you, it is traumatic. It is one of the worst things a child can endure growing up, is the breakup of a family. Very much. The death of a parent early on in life can also be a deep family of origin wound. So there's a lot of things here that they can go through. And of course, as kids, you just take life one day at a time. You don't realize how devastating these things can be. Loneliness. A lot of people think that a person who turns to pornography is looking for a sexual or romantic relationship. That's not the case. It's just generally, it's an escape. Just like a person who's lonely can turn to the bottle for comfort, they can turn to porn. Male insecurity and poor body image. Not thinking that anybody would ever want them. Marital conflicts. Now I have to say, in any marriage, I always tell the spouses that you are in no way responsible for your husband's or wife's pornography use. Right? You did not put a gun to their head to tell them to use pornography. That was totally their decision. But we need to look at what is going on within that marital relationship that would make them turn to pornography. Whenever I work with couples, I always tell them I have 3 clients here. I have a husband, I have a wife, and I have a relationship. And in that relationship, there's this synergy. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we need to look at what's going on in that relationship. Right? The fact is, we all got baggage. We all bring things into our marriages that affect it. Right? I always tell people, when it comes to baggage, I've got steamer trunks, Louis Vuittons. But this is it. The problems in a marriage don't start the minute you say, I do. There's a lot that we bring into it that we have to look at. So that can create marital conflicts, and that can lead to pornography use as a way of self-medicating. Excessive pressures in life, trying to make ends meet. Today people are doing jobs that 20 years ago 2 or 3 people would have done. Right? It's very tough out there in the workforce today. A weak spiritual life. Most of the priests I talk to today will say that across the United States there's this tremendous epidemic of spiritual loneliness. And there's a saying, in everybody's heart there's a God-shaped hole that can only be filled with God. But people don't know it, so they fill it with all kinds of other things, thinking they're going to find happiness and fulfillment. And it never does. Perfectionism. I find this in a lot of students and in priests that lead to it. Grief can be using it to ease the pain. Right now, I'm working with a young man. When he was 11 years old, his mother died of breast cancer. She died on a Monday. By Friday, she was buried. The next Monday, he was back in school again. He never had a chance to really grieve over that loss. And so he turned to pornography to self-medicate. Anger. Often addictions, addictive substances are used to deal with anger deep down inside what a person's struggling with. Mistrust of women and men. I work with a lot of people coming out of really bad breakups, whether it's a dating relationship or a divorce, and their ability to trust in the opposite sex is totally shot. but they're still looking for love and intimacy, so they turn to pornography. A lack of a sense of fulfillment in life, feeling you're not going anywhere, you're in that dead-end job, you're not finding that right relationship in your life, can lead to it. A lack of sexual confidence. People think, that they wouldn't be a good lover, so they think if I view pornography, that'll teach me how to be a better lover. Doesn't happen. Now what happens is people take these deep wounds, these conflicts, and what happens is they lead to the development of 5 faulty core beliefs. And those beliefs are, number 1, I'm unworthy of being loved. Number 2, if people really knew me, they would reject me. Number 3, I can't trust anyone, including God, to meet my needs. So number 4, I must find something that I can control that'll meet my needs. And therefore, number 5, pornography and sex is my greatest needed source of comfort. Now this is common with any addiction. You could take up pornography and sex and you could replace it with alcohol, drugs, gambling, food, video games, whatever. But this is it. Now, and it's not like people are aware of this. It's not like they're walking around saying, gee, I have these deep emotional wounds and these 5 faulty core beliefs and I need to self-medicate with porn. No. All they know is they like looking at porn. But deep down inside, when we get beneath the surface, we find that they are really suffering, and this is what they're using. So really, the pornography use, it's the symptom. It's a coping mechanism. We have a saying in counseling, the problem is never the problem. The problem they come in with, that's just the symptom. We need to get to the real problem. What's the real wound? So this is what happens. And so this leads to the addiction cycle. I hope you can see it on the screen. I know that it's small, but in the top circle, we start out with emotional wounds and shame. Often there's shame associated with that. That leads to adopting the 5 faulty core beliefs, which then leads to acting out sexually. And of course, afterward, a person feels great shame, guilt, and despair, and that just goes right back up and feeds those deep emotional wounds, right? This is the vicious cycle that people who are addicted find themselves in. It's a terrible thing, and this is why we cannot simply view pornography use as a moral failing. We have to look at it as a disease that needs to be treated. And the people who struggle with it need our love, our mercy, and our compassion as they go through this. Let's talk about how pornography affects women, because it's a little different for women. Remember I said men and women are wired differently. Women are not as visually, well, let me talk about first some statistics, okay? Women keeping their cyber activities a secret, 70%. Women struggling with pornography addiction, 17%. So out of all people who are addicted to pornography, 83% of them are men and 17% are women. But as I said, I think it's much higher for women now who are addicted. The ratio of women and men favoring chat rooms 2 times. The percentage of visitors to adult websites who are women, 1 in 3. I already said about a third of them. Women accessing adult websites each month, 9.4 million. Women admitting to accessing pornography at work, 13%. Right? Not as high as men, but it still is there. So again, let's talk about pornography of women. As I said, women are not as visually stimulated as men. Sure, they like to see a nice-looking man, but they don't go crazy over it like men do. All right? Women are more relationally stimulated. They're relationally oriented. This is how they're made up. In any family, who are the people that remember all the birthdays and the anniversaries? It's the women, because they are focused on relationship. But this is what also gets the chemicals flowing in their brains. And let me explain how this works. So often they prefer a fantasy world where they can take place in a relationship. And this is where women like romance novels, soap operas, chick flicks, reality TV, and so forth, because of the relationship going on. So, and also for this reason, they're also more interested in social media. Chat rooms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blogs, erotic stories, and so forth. This is what they get into. You remember I talked about those books, The 50 Shades of Grey? It's pornography disguised as a relationship. That's what they're looking at, okay? So you take that relationship and you eroticize it, that's what gets the chemicals going in a woman's brain. Okay? So here with social media, women can become addicted to the erotic romantic relationships just as men become addicted to erotic images. So let's take an example of a chat room. A woman can get into a chat room, and of course in a chat room you can be anybody you want to be. You can be a tall, blonde, voluptuous supermodel. And in that chat room they get into these highly erotic, highly sexual, pornographic chats with men. Essentially what they're doing is they're getting in this relationship where it's like they're writing their own romance novel, their own racy romance novel, and they're the star. But there's a danger to this because studies have shown that women are actually more likely to want to go out and meet the men that they've met online. So you have a woman who's thinking she's going to have this wonderful romantic rendezvous with the man she met online, when really she's meeting up with a serial murderer or a rapist. And this has happened. In fact, a couple of years ago, Craigslist was sued because something like that happened. But this is what we're finding. See, for men, it's just the visual pornography. Photos, videos. For women, it's much broader. Many other forms of media are used for pornographic reasons. So, now women can also become addicted to the visual pornography like men. They really can. But again, what they're looking for is the relationship. You know, there was a study done where some researchers showed a pornographic video to two groups of people, a group of men and a group of women. And after it was done, they asked, what did you see? The men saw body parts and sex acts. The women saw a relationship being expressed sexually. That's what's going on there with it. And so this is what women are becoming addicted to. So you have women, you know, what's interesting here is there's also sort of an age divide. Young women under the age of 30, those in their teens and their 20s, are far more addicted to the visual porn, whereas those women over 30 have a much broader view. It's visual and the erotic stories, the chat rooms, the blogs, the social media, and so forth. But still, this is still very addictive. And this is what gets those chemical reactions going in their brains. See, the reality is the largest sex organ in your body is right between your ears. Everything else is just a reaction to what's going on up here. However, it's that reaction that reinforces it and makes you want to go back for more. So this is what is happening for women. All right, let's talk about how pornography affects marriages. Nowhere do I see more damage from the pornography epidemic than to marriages. This is where I see the worst damage of it. You know, and you have to ask the question, you know, when a woman discovers her husband doing pornography, well, how does that make her feel? She feels deeply hurt and betrayed. For her, this is as serious as an extramarital affair. This is cheating. It's adultery. Now, a man may not realize that to him the pornography is just images on the computer screen. But to his wife, those aren't images. Those are other women. Right? And that's what hurts. And it affects her self-image, her self-worth, too, because it makes her feel unattractive and undesirable, feeling like she cannot compete. Because let's face it, the women in pornography are usually between the ages of 18 and 25. And thanks to all the plastic surgery, makeup, digital enhancements, photoshopping, whatever, they don't exist in real life. Now you have a woman, a married woman, maybe she's in her early 40s, she's been married maybe 15, 20 years, she has a few kids, she's very beautiful, but she's not 18 anymore. And she certainly doesn't look like the women in porn. But she sees what her husband is viewing and she thinks to herself, he must think I'm ugly. I'm no longer beautiful, I've lost my attractiveness, my desirability. He wants to replace me with these women. And how terrible is it to think that one's husband would want to replace them with an image on the computer screen? Right? It cuts to the core. This is so damaging. You know, I'm convinced that if every husband in the world, if every man in the world knew how this would hurt their wives, they'd never want to touch this stuff. Never. This is how bad it is. Right? What happens is the women, they'll begin viewing their husbands as untrustworthy and weak role models for their children. You know, how can a woman respect her husband if she knows he's viewing pornography? And this is what can happen. She may think to herself, if my husband thinks it's okay to view pornography, is he going to allow our teenage sons to view it? Or even worse, a wife may think, if my husband is looking at these young girls in pornography this way, is he going to look at our teenage daughters this way? This is what they think. It's a horrible place to be. Some women even experience symptoms of severe trauma because of this. We actually have a name for it now. It's called betrayal trauma. And the symptoms are very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. In fact, whenever I work with couples dealing with this, I often have to do 3 types of counseling. I work with the husband to help him recover from the addiction. I work with the wife to help her recover from the trauma and the betrayal. And then I work with the couple to heal the marital relationship. This is what goes on. And it can lead to severe marital problems and divorce. There was a study done by the American Association of Matrimonial Attorneys, also known as divorce lawyers. And what they found is that pornography plays a significant role in over 50% of all divorces. All right? This is what goes on. Now, what's interesting is a lot of times men will come into my office and they'll say, Dr. Pete, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt my wife. Believe me, I never intended to do that. I will never do it again. But she just cannot let go of this. She just can't forget it and move on. She keeps bringing it up over and over and over again. I said, yeah, that's the trauma coming out. And we also have to look again at the way men and women are wired differently. You see, we men, we have the ability to compartmentalize our lives. So a man will say, sure, I look at pornography, but that's only 1% of my life. The other 99% is great. I'm a hard worker, I pay the bills, I walk the dog, I mow the lawn, I'm at my kid's baseball game, I take my wife on dates. The other 99% is great. And let's face it, if you get a 99 on a test, that's an A, isn't it? That's good. Well, women don't look at it that way. They don't. Women don't compartmentalize. Women are more contextual. A woman looks at her life as if it's one giant bucket of water. Everything is in the bucket. Her marriage, her children, her career, the house, the dog, her mother, her sisters. Everything's in there. Now, her husband's use of pornography may be like one tiny drop of black ink. Not much compared to that bucket of water. But when you put that drop of ink into the bucket, it clouds everything. Everything, every area of their life. And it takes a long time for that water to clear up again. And things can stir it up again over and over. And this is what you have to realize. Right? So, this is the way women think. Another thing about women, men often wonder how women can remember conversations that happened 20 years ago. Well, what we found is that for women, every memory has an emotion attached to it, which makes that memory more vivid, come back more vivid, and that's what happens. But this is what goes on. This is the difference between men and women. In fact, there's a joke, a man was talking to a woman and he said, hey, let's think outside the box. And the woman says, what box? That's the way it is. But you have to understand how this affects and can contribute to that trauma and can perpetuate it. Right? We have to be aware of it. And pornography makes all kinds of problems in a marriage. It changes the way a man views women. Right? It leads men to objectify women, to see them only as sex objects. It leads men to compare their wives to the women in porn, and no woman wants to be compared to that because it's a standard of beauty that nobody can achieve. Right? And this is what's wrong. Another thing that happens with pornography use is erectile dysfunction. What happens is after viewing all this pornography, a man conditions himself to only be aroused by the women in porn. So then when he wants to be sexual with his wife, who's a real woman, who's not a size 0, right, he cannot perform. Right? Again, this is the damage that's occurring. In fact, last month, Time magazine had a huge cover article on pornography talking about how it leads to erectile dysfunction. You have men in their 20s and their 30s that are looking to get Viagra. They don't need Viagra, they need to stop looking at porn. So what is the damage to the marriage and family? It leads to this delusional belief that fantasy is better than authentic love. It leads to growth in selfishness, which is a major enemy to marital love and a severe harm to one's spouse. It leads to a failure to understand and appreciate the beauty and sacredness of marital love. It diminishes communication with one's spouse. It leads to sadness, anger, and a diminished ability to trust for the offended spouse. It harms marital intimacy. Now, intimacy is this word. I always get angry when you hear people in the media talking about intimacy. Because whenever they use the word, what they really mean is sex. All right? Intimacy is not sex. Intimacy is the emotional connection between two people where you know each other thoroughly, backward, forward, inside out. You feel safe with each other. You can talk about anything. All right? That's true intimacy. And that's the type of intimacy you want to have in a marriage. But you cannot have that intimacy if someone has a deep, dark secret that they're hiding. Because what you're saying is, yeah, I love you, but I'm not going to give you my whole heart 100%. There's a little part of my heart called porn use that I'm not going to let you have. And who wants just 90% of the heart? I mean, if I'm married to somebody, I want 100% of the heart. But this is what happens. So with pornography use, there cannot be that healthy intimacy in the marriage. It increases loneliness and anger for all parties. It creates a distorted view of beauty, goodness, the human person, and sexuality. Increases vulnerability to adultery, can lead to marital separation and divorce, and it weakens our spiritual life. I mean, let's call it what it is. This is sin. This is what viewing pornography is. Why? Because you're using people, you're breaking those marital vows, it's adultery. We have to be aware of that. Porn in the bedroom. Now there are some men that'll tell their wives and say, honey, let's look at pornography together. It'll spice up our sex lives. You know, we'll learn something new, it'll be fun. Rarely does this ever help anything. Like I said before, women are not as visually stimulated by men. And it's usually driven by the conflicts described earlier. By that I mean these deep emotional wounds and the addiction. There's a lot of men that are addicted to porn that think, well, if I can get my wife to look at it with me, then it's okay. They use it as a way to justify it. But most women really don't get much out of it. Right? But what happens is that it never helps a marriage. Usually it ends up manipulating or coercing women into committing sexual acts that are degrading and even physically dangerous. And that's what most people don't realize, that the sex portrayed in pornography is very dangerous. In fact, let me tell you, most of the time when those pornographic scenes are being videotaped or recorded, the women in them are either drunk or high. Because there's no way they could put their bodies through such physical punishment if they weren't. It is not healthy, normal sex. And then what it does is it separates sex from the unitive and procreative act. It reduces sex to nothing more than a recreational activity where the goal is for me to have the most intense orgasm I can have. Very selfish. And this leads to great disappointment. All right, I want to talk about the damage of pornography to young men, young women, and children, because these are the people today who are most at risk. So when we talk about the damage to young men, we have to ask the question, what is the message that young men are getting from pornography today? It's very simple. Women are solely here for my sexual pleasure. Women don't need to be loved or respected. Women love sex. They can't get enough of it. They beg for it. They want it all the time. They never say no. The sex portrayed in pornography is normal and healthy. That sex and pornography should be a part of any relationship. You know, this is where you get all the sexting that goes on. And that true happiness in life will only come from having multiple sex partners. That's the message. So what happens is it leads to an involvement in a fantasy world that undermines their ability to communicate and relate to women in a healthy manner. Right? Why? They just want to use them. It interferes with the development of a healthy personality. Why? Because it fosters selfishness. It harms our ability to understand and want to make a loving commitment in marriage. That's a fact. There have actually been several studies done with college students, and they find that men in college who use pornography regularly don't want to get married. They think that true happiness is going to come from having multiple sex partners and viewing pornography. Again, they're falling into that illusion that this type of sex is more fulfilling. It fosters the hookup culture, the sexual utilitarian philosophy. What is that? That's simply the belief that it's okay to use others for your own sexual pleasure. And there are people that do it, that there are young people who are developing relationships solely for the purpose of having sex. It's called friends with benefits. That's what it is. No relationship, just sex. Why do women do it? Well, they believe that in order to get a relationship, they have to give it sex. Right? But really, they're not going to get that because the men are just in it for the sex. And ultimately, it results in a sexual obesity. What is that? It's the constant pursuit and consumption of pornography. Ultimately, it leads to severe loneliness, depression, social anxiety, and a profound weakness in confidence. Right? So guys, none of this is going to help you. Let's talk about the damage to young women, because I think this is even worse. Again, what is the message pornography sends to young women? Simple. In order to be loved by a man, a woman must look and act like a porn star. Right? Women must be just as sexually aggressive as men. They need to be out there hunting them down. The sex portrayed in pornography is normal and healthy, and that a woman should enjoy the sex in pornography despite how painful or physically dangerous it is. And that sex in pornography should be a part of any relationship, and in order to keep a boyfriend, a woman must engage in sexting. That's the message they are getting from this pornified culture. Now, according to the APA, that's the American Psychological Association, the sexualization of women leads to girls and young women feeling bad about themselves. There is evidence that sexualization contributes to impaired academic performance and can contribute to body dissatisfaction, eating disorders, low self-esteem, depression, and even physical health problems in high school age girls and young women. In addition to leading to feelings of shame and anxiety, sexualizing treatment and self-objectification can generate feelings of disgust towards one's physical self. Girls may feel they are ugly and gross. Now, this is from the APA's Task Force on the Sexualization of Girls from 2007. But let me tell you, studies like this have been going on for the past 50 years, and they always come up with the same results, that sexualizing young women harms them. But we keep doing it. Why? Because there's money to be made. As long as there's money to be made, the pornographers don't care who they exploit, or who they hurt, or what the effect is. So ultimately, women are reduced to sex toys for men. Men are portrayed as predatory and masterful, never as gentle and considerate lovers. And again, the American Psychological Association makes the vital point that sexualization practices may function to keep girls in their place as objects of sexual attraction, significantly limiting their free thinking and movement in the culture. Right? The sexual revolution did not liberate women. I think it enslaved them even more. But this is what we're looking at here with young women, and it's really dangerous. So, you have to realize that, in pornography, young people, they're not going to learn about healthy sexuality. They're not going to learn about healthy relationships. What they're going to learn to do is how to use people. And for women, it's even worse. In fact, if you look at pornography is really violence toward women. Most pornographic scenes are usually one or more men who are using a woman in sexually violent ways. That's what it's about. There's a wonderful researcher, her name is Gail Dines. She's a sociologist, and she wrote a really great book called Pornland. And in it, she has a great quote. She says, in pornography, men don't make love to women. Men make hate to women. That's what it's about. Now, marriage prep, we do have to address this in marriage prep programs. In many of our marriage prep programs that talk about the dangers of drugs and alcohol, we also have to address the dangers of pornography. And if a woman is married to a man who's using pornography and he's unwilling to address or resolve this conflict, she should really reconsider whether or not she really wants to marry him. We wouldn't want a woman marrying an active alcoholic or drug addict. Why would we want her marrying an active sex addict? It has the same detrimental effect on marriage. Let's talk about children and pornography, because this is really scary here. Let me give you some statistics. The average age of a child's first exposure to internet pornography is 8. And I'm talking hardcore, violent pornography. 80% of 15 to 17-year-olds have had multiple exposures to pornography. Right? So those of you who have teenagers out there, guess what? They view pornography probably multiple times. And the largest single population of internet pornography users are 12 to 17-year-olds. That's who they are. 89% of solicitations of youth in chat rooms are of sexual nature, and 29% of 7 to 17-year-olds would freely give out their addresses online. This is what's happening. You know, it's interesting in our Catholic churches and schools, we have these safe environment programs to help keep kids safe. And that's good. We need to keep them safe. They're necessary programs. But I have to tell you, the sexual predators are not hanging out in the schoolyard. They're on the internet. They're online. That's what they're trying to get to your kids. So what is the damage to children? It robs them of their innocence. It introduces them to a world that they are not able or ready to understand. Right? It leaves them with a distorted view of sexuality. It promotes the sexual utilitarian philosophy. That's the idea that it's okay to use people for your own sexual pleasure. It teaches boys that it's okay to use women, that it's okay to abuse them. And it teaches girls that men are violent and cannot be trusted. And often children will imitate the behavior they view in adult pornography with other children. You know, here's where you hear stories of 11-year-old boys raping 7-year-old girls. That's what happens. Now, I actually consider when a small child is exposed to pornography, I consider that a form of sexual abuse. Imagine this. You have a 7-year-old girl who's left alone with some type of device. And of course she's curious, she goes over, she plays with it, and somehow she gets into a pornographic video where she sees a woman being brutally raped by half a dozen men. Now we as adults can look at that and say, this is disgusting, but we know they're acting. We hope they're acting. But to that 7-year-old girl, she has just witnessed violent gang rape. To her, it's real. And there are children out there who display symptoms of having been sexually abused when they've never been touched. Right? It's all because of what they've witnessed online. This is why we have to protect our children. So an extensive study was done on hardcore pornography by moralityandmedia.org, which shows how it contributes to the sexual exploitation of children. For many perpetrators, there's a progression from viewing adult pornography to child porn. And many perpetrators will groom their victims with pornography, particularly if the victims are young adolescents. So this is what's happening out there with our kids. Let's talk about the spiritual damage to this. Pope John Paul II wrote, the problem with pornography is not that it reveals too much of the person exposed to the image, but that it reveals too little of the person. The person in the image is reduced to their sexual organs and sexual faculties and is thereby depersonalized. And that's what's happening. Bishop Laverde wrote, this plague stalks the souls of men, women, and children, ravages the bonds of marriage, and victimizes the most innocent among us. It obscures and destroys people's ability to see one another as unique and beautiful expressions of God's creation, instead darkening their vision, causing them to view others as objects to be used and manipulated. Those who engage in such activity deprive themselves of sanctifying grace and destroy the life of Christ in their souls. And this is what happens when a person is viewing pornography, he or she is looking at that person on the computer screen. They're not thinking that that person is a unique and beautiful expression of God's creation. If they did, they would never want to use them in pornography. But this is what we see going on out there. Okay. So, I hope you're not too depressed. But it's important to know what is going on out there because people aren't talking about this. But this is what is happening. This is what we're seeing out there. And we have to be careful with it. Thanks to the internet, I mean, this is where it is. You know, and what scares me because you have parents, you know, they're going to the cell phone store, you get the family plan, everybody gets a phone, you got a good plan, it's a decent monthly rate. But what they don't doing is they're handing their kids, who's 11, 12 years old, a smartphone or an iPhone with full access to the internet. And everything that's there. There was a study done by Covenant Eyes which found that only about 12% of parents really know what their kids are doing online. And as I said before, that's where the sexual predators are. And we have to be aware of it, okay? Now, in my next talk, we're going to talk about what you can do to protect yourselves, to protect your families, to make sure that these sexual predators don't get to them. And that's what pornographers are, they're sexual predators. Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 8:15, and I'll get into the second part, and we will have time for questions afterward. Thank you. Oh, by the way, for those who are interested, I have books up here. This is my book, Integrity Restored, Helping Catholic Families Win the Battle Against Pornography. It's $15, so it's everything I'm talking about tonight, plus a lot more on how to protect your family. I also have a DVD here. It's called Unfiltered, Equipping Parents for an Ongoing Conversation about Internet Pornography. And it actually comes with a booklet on protecting your family online. This is $10. I take cash, check, or credit card. All right, we'll be back in 10 minutes. Protecting families and helping those in recovery. Everybody settle down. All right, so in this talk, I want to go over how we can protect our families and how we can help those in recovery. Now, when it comes to protecting families, I divide kids up into two categories. Those up to the age of 11 and those who are 11 and older. Up to the age of 11, we need to protect our kids. We need to make sure that they never encounter any of this stuff. Nothing. And there are things that we can do to actively safeguard them from pornography. 11 and older, we need to train them, we need to educate them on the dangers of pornography so that they can get out there in the world and reject it, because they will encounter it. It will find them. And we have to be very careful about how we train them on this. So what can we do for the young kids? First of all, for kids of ages 0 through 10. First of all, we want to limit screen time. And that's computer, television, cell phone, iPod, iPad, everything. Limit it. I say no more than an hour a day. That's it. Right? We need to monitor all screen use, including emails and texts. And yes, 8-year-olds are texting today. We need to do that. Okay, keep the computer in the public area of the home, and you never leave a child alone with the internet. Never. If you leave your child alone with the internet, you might as well be leaving her alone with a perfect stranger. That's how serious it is. Right? And you want to use a computer filtering service. Now, the one I recommend is called CovenantEyes.com. Right? An excellent service. It works very well at filtering out harmful material. But I have to say, even with filters on your devices, you still need to be there. If your child is on the internet, you need to be standing right behind her at all times, supervising everything that goes on. You need to place parental controls on cell phones. Now, I don't believe a small child should have a cell phone, but there are times when a child needs a cell phone. And in fact, there's only one cell phone that I recommend for children. It's called the Firefly. Any of you familiar with the Firefly? It's a regular old flip phone. You open it up, there's only a couple buttons. You press one button, it calls mommy. Press one other button, it calls dad. You press another button, it calls 911. Very simple for kids. That's all they need. It's called the Firefly. Right? We need to monitor all print media that enters the home. We need to monitor children's use of public access computers. Those are computers at school, at the public library, at the community center, at the YMCA, all that. Because they may not be monitored. They may not have filters on them. Right? In fact, a lot of people don't realize it, but the American Library Association is against placing any filters on their computers. Which means that in many libraries, you could walk into a public library, go to the children's section, sit down at a computer and view pornography. They don't want filters because they see it as a form of censorship. Now, luckily, many public libraries have voluntarily decided to place filters on the children's computers, but you don't know. And you have to make sure that the computers at your child's school also have filters on them. Be aware of that. Okay. You need to know your children's friends, their parents, and what they're doing at their friends' houses. So many times, parents have said, my son was at his friend's house and they were looking at pornography. That's important, right? You know, in your children's school, you need to know what is the curriculum they're being taught on sex education. In many public schools, from an early age, even kindergarten, you know, they're being taught that certain sexual acts are normal and healthy when they're not. Parents need to be aware of what their kids are being taught. All right? You need to teach your children to come and talk to you if they see an image of an immodestly clothed child person. You say, hey, if you're, if you ever see somebody that's not dressed properly, you come and tell me. Right? And when they do, you don't freak out about it. You gently thank them for it. You find out where they saw that image and you make sure they don't see it again. We need to teach children modesty in dress. And it's very simple. I tell my kids, we dress modestly because God wants everybody to notice your smiling face. That's what's most important. We need to teach children to respect their bodies and other people's bodies. I tell my kids, whatever's covered by a bathing suit, we don't touch. It's out of respect. They get it. They understand it. But these are the things that we need to be doing to protect our children. Now, what do you do, let's say, if something happens and your child is exposed to pornography? How do you deal with it? There's a wonderful book out, it just came out, I can recommend. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And it's sort of written on an 8 or 9-year-old level, and it's what parents can use with their children to help them to understand that pornography is not a good thing, and it doesn't lose away, it doesn't shame your child or ridicule them or embarrass them, but in a very good way teaches them about it. So I highly recommend that. Now for kids 11 and older, it's a different story. We have to train them. We have to educate them. So what do? Again, we limit screen time. Computer, television, cell phone, iPad, everything. What I tell parents is every night at 9 o'clock, you collect all the gadgets, you turn them off, and you lock them away in the morning. Why? Well, first of all, kids need to realize that they don't need to be surgically attached to their technology 24 hours a day. And they need time for their brains to decompress. They've been having their face in the screen all day long. Their brain is so hyperstimulated, it needs time to relax and calm down. You need to get away from the technology. And even for adults too, so many adults before you go to bed, you like to surf the web, you like to read a book on your tablet, your book or Kindle and so forth. A lot of people do that and they turn off the light when they go to sleep. Well, guess what? You're not going to get as restful a sleep as if you would if you turn off all the technology an hour or two before you go to bed. You will get a much more restful sleep. If you like to read, use good old-fashioned paper. Right. But we need to unplug in our lives. 8 to 10 hours a day, it's okay to be unplugged. We need to monitor all screen use, including email, text, and social media. Monitor everything, right? At home, any use of the computer needs to be in a public area. Never let a teen isolate with the internet. And we need to put accountability services on computers and cell phones. I mentioned Covenant Eyes. They have a good accountability service. Now, what is that? It's not a filter. An accountability service doesn't filter out anything. What you simply do is you download it onto whatever device you want to have it on, and then you give them mom and dad's email address. And then after that, if the teenager goes on even any questionable website, mom and dad get an email report. What website, what day, what time, for how long. Right? It's a good deterrent, but it also teaches young people not to go to questionable websites in the first place. It has also helped many parents to help their kids who are struggling with pornography. Many parents have come to me because they had Covenant Eyes on their kid's phone, and when they got the reports, they realized that their teenager really was struggling with pornography addiction. All right. They were just too embarrassed to tell their mom and dad about it, but because they were able to get them the help that they needed. But this is it. Now, a lot of times, teenagers, they get angry and they get upset when parents are monitoring the use of the internet, and they say, well, you don't trust me, you're invading my privacy, and so forth. Well, I have to tell the young people, it's not you that we don't trust. It's the pornographers we don't trust. They are sexual predators. Their goal is to get you. They want to get in your lives. They want to get you addicted. Right? Because they know the earlier they get you addicted, the longer they're going to have you as a customer, whether you're male or female. Now, they know that teenagers don't have credit cards. Obviously, they can't pay for it. But guess what? As soon as a teenager turns 18, what comes in the mail? The credit card applications. And that's when they know they're going to get them, and they're going to get a lot of money out of them. Right? And it's our job, our duty as parents to protect our children. We would never allow a sexual predator into our house through the front door. Why would we allow them to get to you through a device? Right? It's about protection. That's what it's all about. Okay. Now, every now and then there are still some teenagers that get angry about this, and in that case I go back to the golden rule. Right? Can anybody here tell me what the golden rule is? He who has the gold makes the rules, right, you know? Who pays for the cell phone? Who bought the cell phone? Who bought the computer, the tablet, the laptop, the video game system? Who pays for the cell phone plan? Who pays for the internet account? Who pays for the electricity that powers all of these things? Mom and Dad do. They own it. And as owners, they have every right to know what's going on there. Again, it's for your protection. And it's interesting, studies have shown that teenagers actually end up being pretty grateful that their parents are looking out for them. Right? Because teenagers know the dangers out there. They know what's going on out there. I know there's several teenagers out there I'm talking to. You know what I'm talking about. You already know this stuff. Right? But parents need to be there to protect their kids. And that's why things need to be monitored. Right? And even things with social media, you know, we need to teach our young people how to use social media wisely. All right? How many people here have Facebook accounts? Okay. All right. So you go onto Facebook, you set up your Facebook account, you put in all this information. Who owns that account? Facebook owns it. Okay. So here's Facebook, this corporation of hundreds of people you don't even know. And you're giving them your personal information? How safe is that? And you talk about, you know, people posting all kinds of pictures up on Facebook, you know, topless in bikinis, you know, nude pictures, all this stuff. And they think, well, I'm just going to set this up so only my friends can see it. Well, guess what, folks? I can pay Facebook a fee that allows me to get into any Facebook account I want. And to see everything. This is what colleges and universities are doing, right? And they're denying people entrance because of what they're posting on the internet. Corporations are doing that. You know, when they're evaluating applications for jobs, they're looking at your Facebook account. They're looking at everything you're doing online. Nothing online is private. And when you put something on the internet and you delete it, it's not deleted. It's there forever. You know, how many of you are familiar with Snapchat? Right? You take a picture, you email it to someone, they open it up and it disappears in 20 seconds. That picture doesn't disappear. I guarantee you somebody's got it somewhere. We need to teach our young people about internet safety, social media safety, because you never know when things are going to crop up later. Right? In fact, when it comes to secure forms of communication, forget the internet, forget cell phones. I mean, you know the government's been listening to us for years on it. In fact, I think the only secure form of communication today is to write a letter, put a stamp on it, and drop it in the mail. That's what it is. All right. But we have to teach our young people about this type of safety on the internet. All right. So, but this is what we need to do. It's about educating. We need to teach our young people that pornography is a highly addictive substance similar to drugs and alcohol. We need to teach them about healthy relationships and sexuality, because they're not going to get that in school. All right, some people came up and were talking to me about the Common Core sex ed program. It's terrible. I mean, it's awful. We need to teach our young people about healthy sexuality and healthy relationships. You know, here's where in our church, John Paul II's Theology of the Body and Love and Responsibility come in. Two excellent documents. We need to teach our teenagers to respect their bodies and other people's bodies, realizing that people are not meant to be used. We need to insist on modesty in dress, helping young women understand how their clothing affects men. Right? And you need to know your teens' friends and their families. Who are your kids hanging out with? Is it a good crowd or not? We need to protect them. This is what has to happen. It's all about education. Right? And they're not going to learn this in school, particularly if they're in public school, but even the Catholic schools are not that great. And if we don't teach them and they're not getting the right information in school, where are they going to go? To the internet. And you know they're going to get the wrong information there. This is what has to happen. Okay. So what are some warning signs in teenagers that there could be a problem with pornography? Well, obviously discovering pornography on their computer, their cell phone, their iPad, tablet, iPod, whatever. That's obvious. But, you know, if he isolates himself with a computer, cell phone, or tablet, or some type of device, if there's a sudden drop in grades, if they're dropping out of extracurricular activities, if they're no longer interested in spending time with family or friends, if there's a change in mood, they're angry, sullen, moody, depressed, or anxious, or if there's disrespect for family rules, this could mean that there is a problem with pornography. And again, schools, religious ed programs, youth ministries, we all need to add pornography addiction and awareness to our curriculums. We need to warn people about the dangers of pornography. We need to warn them about the dangers of sexting, right? You know, a lot of young people don't realize the dangers of it. For example, let's say you have a 14-year-old girl, she takes some nude pictures of herself and she emails them to her boyfriend. What has she just done? What crime has she just committed? Child porn. Most people think that child porn is pornographic images of young children. It's not. It's anybody under the age of 18. Yeah. And there are kids who are actually being arrested and convicted for producing and distributing child pornography. In my local community, the police just did a sweep of the middle school and they arrested several kids for doing that. Yeah. This is what's happening. We need to warn them about the dangers of this. All right? So this is what we need to do. Okay. Now here are some great resources, some websites. The first one is Integrity Restored. That is my website, named after the book. There's chastity.com, which is by Jason Everett, which talks about chastity for teens. And then there's The Porn Effect, which is by my friend Matt Fradd. And that really talks more to teenagers and college students about the dangers of pornography. Some excellent resources. Protecting adults, all right? No one's immune here. This isn't just about the teenagers, but we adults are also at risk. What do we need to do? We need to educate ourselves about the dangers of pornography. We need to educate ourselves about new technology. Because I guarantee you, anytime a new app comes out, a new computer program, a new gadget, you better believe the pornographers are going to look for a way to use it to get their pornography into your lives. So you need to be aware of what's coming out. Now you may wonder, well, where I go for that information. CovenantEyes.com has a website that provides great information on all the new gadgets and technology out there. All right, they do the work for you. All you have to do is read it. Need to monitor all technologies. I mean, hey, I've got Covenant Eyes on my cell phone and on my computer. Right? I've got it on this, I've got it on everything. It's like insurance. You know, you hate to pay for it, but you need to have it. There needs to be open communication between spouses. Be honest if there are any flaws. Be willing to seek help if there is a problem. And remember, the problem is never the problem. Right? Pornography use is a symptom. And we need to get to the root of it. Okay. Now let's talk about what do we do to help people who are struggling with pornography use. Well, the first thing we need to do is determine whether or not we're dealing with a porn problem or an addiction. You know, just like a person can have an alcohol problem and not be an alcoholic, a person can have a pornography problem and not be a porn addict. So what's the difference? Well, the person with the porn problem, they may view it a couple times a month. It's usually the same pornography. It hasn't gotten worse or escalated. It's not premeditated. They're not thinking about it. They're not purposely going online looking for porn. There's little or no craving for pornography. There's no marked increase in pornography. You know, maybe whenever they go online, something happens, they click on a few screens and then get into some pornographic website or whatever. So, but this is still a problem and it does need to be addressed before it could turn into a possible addiction. So the person who actually has an addiction, what does that look like? Well, this is a person who's using pornography to escape painful emotions. For them, a tolerance has developed. It escalates. They're no longer looking at soft porn, now they're looking at hardcore porn. And the amount of time that they're spending viewing pornography is increasing. A dependence develops. There could be withdrawal symptoms, or maybe they're not, but they just can't stop using it. They keep going back to it. They may be willing to take risks to view pornography, such as viewing it at work, even though they could lose their job. And despite their best efforts, they are unable to stop. And ultimately, their life has become unmanageable. It has become ruled by the pornography. Those are the signs of the addiction. Now, there are a couple of good self-tests that you can use. I have my own personal website, peterkleponis.com. On there's a test called the Internet Sex Screening Test. It's an excellent test that will help you identify your risk of pornography addiction. There's another one by Dr. Kevin B. Skinner. He's the one. He's at the Latter-day Saints Church out in Salt Lake City. He has a great website called growthclimate.com, and he has a good online test too. But even still, these types of tests, it's not something you can use to get a definitive diagnosis. Really, it takes the help of a trained mental health professional to diagnose any type of problem or addiction. So you want to keep that in mind. So what does recovery look like? What does a successful recovery look like? So this is what I did. This is my recovery program. I call it the Integrity Starts Here Recovery Program. It is the first Catholic recovery program for pornography addiction. Now, when I developed this, I decided not to reinvent the wheel. So what I did was I looked at several successful recovery programs and I asked one question: what works? Let's keep what works and let's get rid of what doesn't. And I was able to boil it down to 7 points. These are 7 things that are needed for a healthy recovery program, and I'm just going to briefly go over them. The first one, I hope you can see them. It may be difficult to see, but at the top, the first point is self-knowledge and commitment. Self-knowledge means you admit you have the problem, there's no denial, you take full responsibility for the addiction, for the consequences of your addiction, and you're committed to doing whatever it takes to recover. So if recovery means you have to move a mountain, well, by golly, you better be ready to move a mountain. Now, self-knowledge also means knowing what your weaknesses are. So we identify the triggers that could lead you into pornography use. We identify your danger zones. Those are the specific times, places, or situations where you're more vulnerable to falling into pornography use. Once we have that information, then we can develop the strategies to avoid using pornography. I call them battle plans, and I have worksheets for that. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is purifying your life. We get rid of all pornography, we get rid of all access to it, and we make sure it doesn't come back. Here's your making sure all your use of technology is monitored, and this is where covenant eyes comes in. But it means more than that. It means learning how to truly respect women, to truly guard your eyes. What a lot of men don't realize is when they're looking at a woman and they're ogling her, what they're really looking at are body parts. And I tell men, when you find yourself doing that, look at her face. Humanize her. All right, so we talk about that. We talk about setting clear boundaries in your life. Boundaries with certain people. All right, let's say you have friends that like to view pornography or go to strip clubs. Well, you got to get new friends. Boundaries with places. Let's say your ride to work has you driving past a porn shop or a strip club. Well, you got to find a new route to work. Right? Situations, technology. What are the healthy boundaries that are needed? We set them. But this is all about purifying your life. Point number 3 is all about support and accountability. You cannot do this alone. There are no lone rangers in recovery. You need to surround yourself with other people who understand the struggle, who are going to support you and keep you accountable. And you do the same for them too. All right? How many of you are familiar with who Bill Wilson was? Anybody? Bill Wilson was the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. He had a great quote. He said, "I figured out that the best way for one drunk to stay sober is to help another drunk stay sober." And that's why they call it a fellowship. It's so important to have that. It's a team approach. And here's where they also go through the 12 steps. How many of you have ever read the 12 steps? All right. If you haven't, go online, read it. It's wisdom for life. You don't have to be addicted to anything to benefit from it. And they're very Catholic too. So these groups are very important, and there's many different kinds of 12-step support groups out there that can help a person. But it's important to have that team effort, knowing you're not alone. Right? And remember we talked about, the people who struggle with addiction, they have these deep emotional wounds, and they live by those 5 core beliefs. Number 1, I'm unworthy of being loved. Number 2, if people really knew me, they would reject me. Number 3, I can't count on anyone, even God, to meet my needs. So number 4, I need to find something that I can control that'll meet my needs. Therefore, number 5, sex and pornography is my greatest needed source of comfort. A big part of recovery is changing those core beliefs, letting go of them and adopting new and healthy ones. And what are those new beliefs? Number 1, I am lovable. Number 2, if people knew me, they could love me more. Number 3, I can count on God and other people to meet my needs. So therefore, number 4, God and healthy relationships are my greatest needed source of comfort. Attending a support group meeting is where you can really begin to change those core beliefs. Because I have to tell you, if you ever want to go any place to experience total 100% unconditional love and acceptance, go to a 12-step meeting. There's a place where you can go and you can share your deepest, darkest secret, and they're okay with it. They still love you. They want to help you. It's a wonderful experience. Right? But that's important accountability. Point number 4 is counseling, getting to the root cause. Remember, like I said, the problem isn't the problem. The pornography is a coping mechanism. What are you self-medicating? What are those deep wounds? We need to identify them and work on healing for them. There also needs to be healing for wives or spouses who have been hurt by this, for their trauma. Healing for the marriage that's been torn apart. Counseling is very important for this. Point number 5 is a spiritual plan. You need God. Now, it's not like we're going to pray it away because we know that it doesn't work. But people who struggle with pornography addiction or any addiction often have a difficult time truly understanding how much God really loves them. How God delights over them, how they are fearfully and wonderfully made. They have a very difficult time with that. They have a difficult time understanding how God could be active in their recovery. All right? Why? Because they keep praying, Lord, take it away, take it away, take it away, and He doesn't. Well, you got to understand how God works, right? Because there are 2 ways that God can deal with it. He can either do it by curing you, or He can do it by healing you, all right? What's the difference between a cure and a healing? Time. A cure is immediate, a healing takes time. And what most people looking for a cure, they say, Lord, take it away, take it away. Now, God could do that. God could snap His fingers and you'd be cured and you'd be gone and no problem. You'd be healed and keep it perfect. But what would that do to your relationship with God? Not much. You'd say, thanks a lot, God, I appreciate it. I'll come back when I need you. Right? But the healing, it's a process. And in that process, God is saying, let's walk for a while. Let's talk for a while. Let's get to know one another. Let's develop a deep, loving, intimate relationship. That's what it's all about. So I tell people in this process, don't look for a cure. Engage in the healing. And it's important to understand how God is active in that recovery process. And it's usually through the people. How many of you are familiar with the old joke about the man who's in his house and the flood was coming? Anybody hear that one? Anybody? Oh, I gotta tell you this joke. A man's sitting in his house, and a flood's coming. But he's a very faithful man, and he prays every day, and he's going to trust God. So someone comes by in a car and says, get in the car, we'll take you to higher ground, the flood's coming. And he says, no, I want to trust God, and He's going to take care of me. Well, the next thing you know, the flood water's rising, he's up on the 2nd floor of his house. And someone comes by in a boat and says, get in the boat, we'll take you to higher ground, the flood's getting worse. And he says, no, I'm going to pray and trust in God, and He's going to take care of me. So the next thing you know, he's up on top of his house, and someone comes by in a helicopter, and they drop a ladder down, and they say, climb up, we'll take you to higher ground, the flood's getting worse. And he says, no, I'm going to pray and trust God, and He's going to take care of me. Well, the flood waters overtake him, and he drowns. So here he is up in heaven, and he meets God for the first time, and he says, Lord, I don't understand this. You told me that if I prayed and I trusted in you, you would take care of me, you'd save me. And God says, well, yeah, I sent you a car, a boat, and a helicopter. What else did you want? Right? It's through the people that you meet in recovery. This is where you see God working. The people in your support group, the therapist, your spiritual director, your confessor, all of that. This is so important. And for all the people that I work with who are struggling with pornography addiction, I recommend that they find a good spiritual director, someone they can sit down with once a month and talk about their relationship with God, and really work on deepening that. This is a key part of recovery. Point number 6 is education. You need to educate yourself on this stuff, on the addiction, the recovery, what all this does. This is what I'm doing. That's why you're here. We need to educate, Several of you came up and bought my book, Integrity Restored. Right? I have another brand new book out. It's called Integrity Starts Here, A Catholic Approach to Restoring Sexual Integrity. This is my recovery program, all written down on the book. Right? I only have one copy of this. You can get it on Amazon.com. Right? This walks a person through the entire recovery program. Right? Education is a key part of this. It's also about learning about healthy relationships, healthy sexuality, healthy intimacy, learning how to forgive those who hurt you, learning about healthy living, healthy self-care. Education is a big part of it. Point number 7 is virtue. If you're going to fight a vice, you have to do it with virtue. Right? What are the virtues? Well, honesty, courage, perseverance, trustworthiness. This is a big thing. Virtue is so important, and it's an important part of the recovery process. So you see, initially recovery is about getting away from something, getting away from the drug. But eventually it's about what you're moving toward that healthy life, toward becoming the person God created you to be, that healthy person. For the men I work with, I say, look, God is calling you to be strong leaders, providers, and protectors. You cannot do that if you're enslaved to anything. How do you become a strong leader, provider, and protector? You strive to live a virtuous life every day. Now, what are the virtues? There are cardinal virtues and theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, and so forth. But there are many other ones that are important, right? How many of you men here were Boy Scouts? Okay. Who here can recite the Scout Law? Yes? Can you recite it? Good. Give that boy a merit badge. Okay. That's right. A scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Those are virtues. And what I do is I find when the men, they understand this, and they embrace it, and they make it their mission in life to become the best leader, provider, and protector they can be, to live a virtuous life. Right? And I have virtue exercises that I have them do. This is what it is. This becomes the focus. So the focus of their life isn't just staying away from pornography, but it's becoming the man God created them to be. Same thing with women. Becoming the woman God created you to be. And that's also by living a virtuous life. This is the important thing. And you see, the ultimate goal of recovery is really transformation. That's what it's all about. Becoming that new creation in Christ, a whole new person. And this is what actually makes recovery exciting for a lot of people. When they finally understand that, they finally get it. That's when they know what it is. And it makes life a lot easier. It's like, for example, relationships. A lot of men come to me and they say, Dr. Piet, I don't understand it. What do women want? And I say it's very simple. A woman wants a man who's going to be a strong leader, provider, and protector. Who's going to be a virtuous man. And let's face it, what woman wouldn't want to be married to a man who is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent? Can I get an amen from the women? Yeah. Exactly. Okay. That's what it is. All right. In fact, I work with a lot of young men, teenagers, and college students, and I tell them this, I say, listen, if you want to be a hot commodity on campus, if you want every woman there to want to date you, here's what you do. You let the women know that you don't use pornography, you're not out there to hurt or exploit them, you're striving to live a virtuous life, and you go to church on Sunday. All right? Every woman will want to date you, because they know you're not going to hurt them, you're not going to cheat on them, you're not going to use them. That's what it's about. Right? Same thing for women. You know, men love a virtuous woman. In fact, in Proverbs, there's a whole part of it that talks about the glory of a virtuous woman, how beautiful she is. But this is what it is. So when men and women understand that and they embrace it, this is where their lives take off. And like I said, recovery actually becomes exciting. Because they're like, yeah, now I know what I'm supposed to do. Now I know how to live. Now I know how to have a healthy life. That's what it's about. Okay. So these are the 7 points of recovery. It's not rocket science. It's not. But it does take patience and perseverance. You got to stick with it. And it's been my experience that when people stick with it, that's when they experience freedom. Right. So that's the 7 points. For more information, you go to Amazon and you can get this. Okay. So what are some obstacles to recovery? Okay, shame. Shame is a big obstacle. And we have to distinguish between guilt and shame. Okay? Guilt is good. Shame is bad. Right? Guilt focuses on the action while shame focuses on the person. So guilt is the emotion that says, okay, you did something wrong and you got to fix it. All right. Shame is the emotion that says you did something wrong and because of this you're a terrible, horrible person and you should just go and hide. Because if people found out about who you really are and what you did, they would reject you, they would ostracize you, you would be an outcast, it would destroy you. Alright? So, shame is not good. We've got to let go of the shame. The guilt's okay, but the shame is bad. We need to work on letting go of that. Fear is another obstacle. Fear, what will it take to recover? What will it cost? How much time will it take? If my wife finds out, will she leave me? What if my neighbors find out? What's going on? There's a lot of fears they need to overcome. Selfishness. There are a lot of people who are addicted to pornography, but they don't care. They're going to continue to use it, and that's just the way they're going to be. Denial. There are a lot of people who are addicted and don't want to believe it. They're like, what's the big deal? Every guy does it. It's a guy thing. Who cares? There's denial. And then pride. I work with a lot of people who say, yes, I know I'm addicted, but I don't need any help. I want to do it by myself. I'm going to pull myself up by my own bootstraps and I'm going to overcome this on my own. Rarely do they ever succeed. But these are the obstacles. Okay. So what can you do to help people? First of all, we need to be committed to the church's teaching on human sexuality. Unfortunately, a lot of people aren't, but we need to be committed to that. Don't be afraid to teach about it. Discuss the dangers of pornography with teens and youth ministry. Okay. Host a training conference for parents. All right, that was the DVD I was selling here. That's called Unfiltered. It is a parent workshop. If you want to see it, you go to my website, peterkleponis.com, and you can see it. We need to strengthen Catholic fatherhood. All right, dads, you need to get involved in your kids' lives. Really teaching them about virtue, teaching that true masculinity and femininity is measured by one's character. Right? I have a good friend, he has 5 daughters. God bless him. I just think to myself, that's 5 weddings. But anyway, he has a rule in his house. They cannot date until they're 16. And they go on their first date on their 16th birthday. And it's a date they go on with him. And he goes out and he says, this is how a gentleman treats a lady. If any boy doesn't treat you this way, he's not worth going out with. And I know that their mother is teaching them how to be true ladies. This is what we need to do. Be ready to refer people to the proper help, identify the resources needed for recovery, therapists, support groups, men's groups, books, websites, DVDs, all that. Okay? Today I did a training conference for priests, and they will have a whole list of resources that can guide you to the right people. Okay. Consider starting a men's ministry group that can address pornography in your own parishes. I talked to priests about this today, about the importance of men's ministry in their parishes. But I have to tell you, a lot of these priests, they've got a lot of work to do. And what we really need are the laymen to step up to the plate and really start these men's groups. And it's in those groups that you can address issues like pornography. Right. Offer to host a 12-step group in your parish for those addicted to pornography. Now, people are often wondering, if I do that, what kind of people am I going to have at this meeting? Is it going to be a bunch of sick perverts? I said, no. They're nice, normal, everyday people. You know, probably the people on your parish council. So, but that's it. We need to educate parents and teens about healthy relationships and sexuality, right? And communicate the beauty and sacredness of sexuality in the sacrament of marriage and in marriage prep programs. Seems like a lot, but it's not impossible. Okay, I'm just skip over that. Okay, and I want to talk about my website. You know, my book, the title of my book is Integrity Restored. But what happened was, a couple of years ago, a group of people approached me and they said, look, this is a big problem. Let's get together and let's create an organization that can educate people and really help them with it. And that's what we did. We created integrityrestored.com, which is an education organization. We've got a great website up right now. We're going to be doing a lot of different conferences, a lot of events. This September, I'm going to be hosting a 3-day intensive workshop for men who may be struggling. We're going to have it at Malvern Retreat House outside of Philadelphia. In fact, this week, a priest friend of mine who's on our board, Father Sean Kelponis, is doing a 3-day intensive workshop for priests who are struggling. So we're going to be doing lots of workshops, lots of training, so stay tuned for that. But our goal is really to get out there and to educate as many people as possible so that we can protect ourselves, we can protect our families, but also help those who are struggling find the help that they need for recovery. Okay. All right, so it's about 5 minutes now, and I don't want to keep you too long, but does anybody have any questions? Be sure to speak up. I don't have another microphone. Am I that good? Come on, you're inflating my ego. Challenge me. Yes?
I just wanted to ask you, this chapter should be overflowing tonight because it's such a critical issue for anybody who loves someone else, a family member or themselves or whatever. I mean, this is about creating a civilization of love instead of a culture of death.
Yep.
So how do we pack the house?
How do you pack the house? There is an answer to that. Okay. You're right. This place should be packed out. Why is it not? Well, there are a lot of people themselves who are struggling, a lot of parents who are struggling with this addiction, and they're afraid to come because they're afraid that maybe people will actually find out that they're struggling. So, and then there are parents out there who are in denial, who think, you know, my child, my little darling, would never look at pornography. Famous last words. So how do we get people in here? Well, you kind of need a carrot and a stick. And I was at one parish, actually in my own diocese. I went there in the evening, give a talk like this, and they packed the house out. And I said, how did you do it? And they said, it was simple. We said, for every parent that signed up to come to this conference, we put their names into a drawing for a $500 scholarship at the parish school. So it brought them in. And so I don't know, do a raffle, but, you know, whatever, but yeah, sometimes you need a carrot and a stick to get people in here. But it's true, we need more people in here. And it's not that I don't think people are aware of this problem. I think people are very well aware of this problem, but they're too afraid to actually address it. Any other questions? Yes? Yes, it's very interesting, the debate as to whether or not pornography is addictive. There's a lot of question about that in the psychological community. However, there is no question about it in the neurobiology community, the people who study the brain. And let me tell you why that is. The APA, it's actually two organizations, the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association, they're brother and sister. They are political organizations. They're really not research-driven. And when it comes to human sexuality, their agenda is to declare that there is no deviant sexuality. None whatsoever. Anything goes. Okay? And this is why, you know, a couple of decades ago, they took homosexuality out of the books as a disorder, even though there was no evidence to show that it wasn't. In fact, just a couple of years ago, there was a big push to take pedophilia off the books as a disorder. They wanted to relabel it simply as a sexual orientation. Luckily, there was a huge backlash and they backed off of that. But there's this idea that, there is no deviant sexuality, so it's basically based on your ability to function. If you can get up in the morning, get dressed, go to work, be productive, be happy, come home, pay your bills, be a productive member of society, but you like to have sex with animals, fine, go for it, that's no problem. Right? There is no deviant sexuality. Now, the problem is that if we're looking at sexual addiction, naturally, we are looking at a deviant form of sexuality. So, but if there is no deviant sexuality, then there can be no sexual addiction. There are just people with very strong libidos. There's the problem. However, on the other side, from the neurobiological perspective, the people studying neurology who are really studying the brain and the effect of pornography on the brain, they're the ones that are saying, yeah, this is an addictive substance, and that's where people's minds are going to be changed, and people are really going to say, yeah, this is an addiction. Because these are people dealing with hard science, not the fluffy social sciences. They're dealing with hard science, medical science. And that's what's going on there. Yeah. Sad to say, but that's what's happening. Yes?
There are a couple of groups that are working against pornography in the schools as part of pornography, and several of us are here from those groups, Stop Racism Community, and simply outside of the community, and if anybody's interested in helping with that, we could sure use a lot more help.
Excellent, great, thank you. Yes? SNL. Yeah, you're familiar with AA, Alcoholics Anonymous? Well, there is SA, Sexaholics Anonymous. And of course, there's Al-Anon for the family members of alcoholics. Well, there is SNL for the family members of sex addicts. And that's just one. There are several other groups out there. There's a wonderful Christian organization. It's a 12-step group called Celebrate Recovery. And what's interesting about this group, it is a Christian group, but it's not for any one particular addiction. You could be struggling with anything and attend. In fact, they market themselves as a group for people struggling with hurts, habits, and hang-ups. It's excellent. There's another 12-step group called the Life Recovery Groups. And Life, L-I-F-E, stands for Living in Freedom Every Day. It's an excellent group. It's a Christian group. They actually took the 12 steps and condensed them down into 7 steps. So there are a lot of good groups out there that you can turn to. Yes?
You made a comment that Catholic schools are teaching sex ed very well here.
Yeah.
I'm a Catholic middle school, high school teacher.
Yeah.
So what would be something that you say that we should see in our schools?
Well, I think that, what I find with a lot of sex ed programs, I call it the basic plumbing course. This is a fallopian tube, and this is what it does. There's not a lot of talk about relationships. There's not a lot of talk about intimacy. There's not a lot of talk about respect for oneself and for other people. I mean, that's what we really need to get into, right? Because it's more than basic plumbing. There's some electricity involved that we have to address. And this is what we need to talk to our kids about. Yes?
When you really talk about Facebook, I just encourage parents, because social media and Facebook actually has a pretty strict policy on what content they allow. It's still not perfect. I encourage parents, I don't know if it's Instagram or Twitter especially.
Yeah.
They let ISIS.
Yeah. You're right, and Twitter has a new service where you can attach videos to it now. Okay? And there are other ones. There's a new one called Periscope that's out there that people are using. Every day it seems like there's something new that's coming out there. Pinterest, people are posting on. Tumblr. There's so many things out there. This is why like I said, the Covenant Eyes website has information on all those things. I can't keep up with them. Yes? And fluff.
It's the fluff that is writing education policy, and that's where so much of this cultural attitude is coming from. I showed you the National Sexuality Education Standards. It's built into the curriculum. It's not just the sex classes, it's
I can't tell you that. I'm not an expert in that. Okay, this is where we need groups that can do that. There's an organization in Washington, D.C. called Morality and Media. It's a lobbying group. Their president is a guy named Patrick Truman, a wonderful Catholic man, and they're really working down, on the level of the policymakers to help change some of this stuff. So that's an organization that I would talk to about that. I mean, here you're talking about the whole education system. I'm more about recovery and protection. Yeah. I wish I could give you more. Yes?
How does a person find the words to approach someone without causing defensiveness? So that you can open up doors for the possibility of conversation about this. Because it is a huge category.
It is.
So,
Well, I mean, you're talking about confronting someone that you know is struggling with pornography?
it's the same thing with raping or
Yeah.
anything else. People shut down when they're accused of something.
Yeah. I know it's hard, but sometimes you have to confront them and say, I think there's a problem here. But I'd say, I care about you. And you have to expect they're going to be defensive automatically. You have to expect them to say, look, here's the problem here. With the pornography, I think this is a problem. I think you need to get this checked out, right? And and it's important that when you're doing this, basically you're talking about doing an intervention, and it's always helpful that you don't do the intervention alone. Now, I wouldn't say you look on TV, you see people doing interventions, and then they're surrounded by 10 people. Like, no, don't do that. Okay, you and one other person say, look, we're concerned about you. We see this behavior now, and we see it's affecting your life, and it's affecting many other people's lives around you. We think this is a problem. You need to get it checked out. Here are some resources. Right? You just don't want to tell them, I think it's a problem, and leave them hanging there and say, here are some resources. Here are some people you can talk to. Right? And we think you need to be able to do this and check this out. And then don't just leave it at that. Follow up, say, how are you doing? I gave you the resources. Did you talk to anybody? What are you doing about it? But you want to let them know that you do care. There was a question back here?
I was just going to make a comment. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I remember I was saying I didn't have a problem, and I was working at a teacher, the priest, got a mark, who's in the back, early 80s, and he said, if your drinking causes problems, then you have a drinking problem. I'm addicted and I'm alcoholic. And that training that way, just, there's something to think about. If you're using something problem with a problem, if you're viewing pornography as causing problems, there's probably a problem. And framing it that way
Yeah.
wasn't really helpful.
Exactly. You don't want to come out and say, I think you're addicted. You say, this is a problem, and we need to get it checked out. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, it is about 10 after 9. I'm going to let you go, but I want to thank you all for coming. And it's wonderful to be here. Of course, it's the people that weren't here that really should be here, but, we do the best we can. But thank you very much.